If you've done any analytics work in a business setting, you've likely run into times where you didn't have as much time as you wanted to complete your analysis. I'm taking the same data set today and analyzing it over 3 different time periods. First, I'm going to see how much I can learn in 1 minute. Then I'll spend 10 minutes doing an analysis. And finally, I'll spend an hour working with that same data set. My end goal is to see what types of data visualizations I can create in each of these time frames and how much they tell me about the information that's in my data set. Hi, I'm Jen. I help people build analytic skills and careers with new videos on this channel every week. Check out the links in the descriptions for more resources. I'm working with a data set from Statistics Canada that it contains wholesale trade sales per month over multiple different categories under the North American Industry Classification System. The data set itself isn't critical to what I'm about to do. I wanted something that was free, publicly available, and contained some sales data and other information similar to what a business might want to track. As you can see, I used Google Dataset Search to search for sales and then sorted just for things that had been updated in the past year, were free for non-commercial use, and then I just skimmed through the datasets available, trying to find something that might be business applicable. The data included with this was the actual source data and then a metadata file that gives a bit more detail about the type of information contained in it. Here I'm setting my timer for 1 minute and getting ready to jump in. I'm using Excel for this analysis because I'm including the time to make the connection to my source data in my total time. So I don't want to waste a lot of time setting up connections anywhere else. The first step that I'm going to take is throwing on a filter to see if there's anything really critical that I need to know if I'm doing a quick 60-second analysis. I'm seeing a few things to include, and now I'm building a pivot chart just because that's going to happen very quickly. I can pull it together quickly. Geographically, I'm selecting all of the regions, but deselecting Canada as a whole, so we're not double counting anything. I'm also selecting a filter for the adjustments and only using seasonally adjusted data, again, so I'm not double counting anything. And then adding the value in here. I'm running out of time quickly to do anything else. I purposely didn't look at this data ahead of time, so you're seeing in real time what I'm working through, trying to figure out what else I can learn in 60 seconds of looking at this data. Here's the finished chart for the 60-second data visualization. We don't learn a lot here other than that some of the regions obviously have a much higher impact than others, a much higher total value. We see Ontario leading the way, followed by Quebec and Alberta, and then we have some regions which are very small, almost non-existent next to the other ones. This gives us a rough idea of what the country as a whole looks like, but probably not a whole lot of useful information. This is likely what we would expect from sales data or any financial data about Canada just based on rough population spread. Now let's move on to the 10-minute data visualization. With this, I'm also going to keep working in Excel. I think even 10 minutes is going to feel very quick for a data set I'm not familiar with. The first minute, I'm just going to spend recreating the same place we were at the end of our 60-second, our 1-minute data visualization, because I think that was a really good starting point. Before I start randomly adding anything else to the chart, I'm going to go back to my data and see what else I can learn from it. This is something I usually like to spend more time on at the beginning of any sort of analysis or data visualization, and there just was really not much time for it when I was doing the 1-minute view. So I'm looking through my data here, trying to figure out what else might be important. As you notice, I focused in on those North American industry codes and notice that they aren't all completely unique. There's some major categories there. So I'm going to want to work with those and make sure I include those so I'm not double counting anything within my data. I'm making the decision here to go ahead and change my chart type to be a stacked bar instead of just a side-by-side bar, because then we can keep all of that regional information, which was helpful, but we can see it added up against multiple major categories. Here you can see those different categories. I've moved the chart to a new page to make it a little easier to work with. And I'm going to apply some filters on these classification codes. So I want to get in here and I want to get rid of all the 4-digit codes because they're subsets of the 3-digit codes. Again, this is something we should have captured at the very beginning if we had a little more time to look at our data sets, because now we know that our 60-second visualization had a major flaw in it. It was double counting really everything in our data set. So in terms of ratios to each other, maybe the regions were correct, the provinces were correct, but we know that the total numbers weren't right. I'm selecting just those 3-digit codes and then pulling in the data so that I can have those stacked bars. I've spent a few minutes now doing a little formatting to make my chart look a little sleeker, look a little better for the end result. You can see I'm speeding this up, skipping through some of the time just to not bore you too much, even though it was going very quickly for me. The last thing in this cleanup I'm doing is applying some sorts to try to organize my data in a little bit better of a way. I'm also purposely forcing myself to slow down at some points and take a step back to look at the information to see what else I might be missing. I want to pull something else into this analysis because we've got 4.5 minutes left, so I decided to pull in the date information. This goes the whole way back to 1993, so I thought it could be interesting to just look at 2019 and 2020 data in here, which is a little more relevant than having a full 30 years of data within our data set. I wrapped that up pretty quickly and decided to move on to creating an additional chart that could tell us something else about the data, because I didn't see anything that was going to make an obvious major difference in what I had already done. I'm recreating a similar chart to what we did for the regional information, but I'm doing this for Canada as a whole, and then I'm going to add on the different 3-digit categories, again changing this to just be 2019 and 2020 data. Time is quickly disappearing. I'm updating my chart header so that we're giving information to whoever's looking at this. Flipping back and forth, I'm down to less than a minute, so I'm just doing minor tweaks at this point, but these charts are all but finalized at this point. So let's skip ahead and we'll look at the end results that we have right here. Here you can see our first chart. Ideally, what I should have done here was put a total line in and then sorted by that, but hidden it. I didn't think about that in the 10 minutes I was doing it, but I'm definitely thinking about it now that I'm looking at the finished results. Let's switch to our second chart. Here you can see that total Canada chart by the major category. So we have machinery, wholesale, etc. at the top, and then it quickly dwindles off into a few other areas. Let's move into the 1-hour visualization. I'm going to do things a little bit different here just because I have more time to actually work with this. So you can see I'm sketching out by hand what I think I might want to do with this visualization. I'm going to use Tableau since I have an hour. I've got a little more time to work with it, and I think I can get some nicer visualizations in that time. I can create more of a story with that data if I use it in Tableau versus Excel, which I was using just for the sake of time. This is something I usually do if I'm starting out an analysis or a visualization. I take some time to sketch out what I think I want to do. So I'm sketching out a few ideas here for a dashboard, for a story, which you could also think of as a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm going to decide as I go exactly which direction it'll take depending on what I end up seeing in the data. You might have noticed that one of the additional things that I put in was per capita figures for some of the location related data and perhaps for the country as a whole. I thought this could reflect an interesting change. If we were seeing growth, was it related to the number of people perhaps, or was it just independent of that? I got this information from Statistics Canada. I pulled it off screen, but am including it in my countdown time for this total hour. So now I'm just adding in these different files, and I'm going to filter to take out the geographic location for Canada as a whole, because everything else I have can just sum up based on that. So just some initial cleanup of my data before I jump into actually creating charts. Filtering that, changing some of the different types of information. so that I have the dates set to be dates instead of numbers, geographic location set to be province, and a few other minor changes like that. I'm also going to connect my two data sources together, create a relationship between them so that when I go to pull them in some of the charts later on, I have that relationship ready to go and set up. A few other somewhat maintenance related items I'm going to take care of before I jump in the whole way. I'm going to go ahead and create a calculated field that takes the reference month to a quarter. I can do this in the analysis in Tableau, but I'm going to use the same formula to connect the population data and the data for the sales, because my sales data is monthly and the population data is quarterly. And so I need to do a calculation for this. So I'm going to include it both in my data set and in the relationship, setting those up. I also pretty early on set up some filters that I'm applying to most of the sheets that I do. So I'm going to filter on just the seasonally adjusted data. I'm going to filter down to the 3-digit codes so I'm not double counting anything in the data. And I'm going to take the last 10 years of data because some of my data goes back to 1993. But as you might see flash across the screen at some point, some of that earlier data isn't accurate at all levels. It's just at a complete level. So I want to just take the newest information, but enough that we're able to tell a story, get some insights from it. Now that I've got this data sorted out a little bit, filtered into some things that will be helpful, I'm going to start creating a few different charts. I'm just working through those initial charts that I sketched out at the beginning, and I'm going to work through some of those and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about what I'm finding. Okay, at this point I've sketched out quite a few of those charts, added in some per capita information like we were talking about, and now I'm just making a short list of key takeaways I'm seeing in the data. At this point, I'm leaning more towards a story format to lead the viewer, lead the reader through what's been going on. So specifically, there's some massive changes the first 2 quarters of 2020. Of course, most likely related to COVID-19 and some of the changes that that's led to. So here I'm looking at different things that went up, things that went down, and making notes of those so that I can consider what else I might want to include in my analysis. After finishing up those notes, I went ahead and made probably about twice as many charts with some different things that I wanted to explore, look at, see what I might want to include. Now I'm moving on to creating the story. So at this point, I have about 20 to 25 minutes left in the analysis. And to do this story, I'm starting out with an overall trend of what's been happening in terms of sales. I want to look at this and then try to build off of it to tell a more complete story. Usually what happens when you're putting together one of these, or at least when I'm putting together one of these, is I start to kind of get a logical order, and then I'll find myself modifying, adding additional charts, taking some out, changing how I word the story, so that at the end it's very logical for the person looking at it. I've skipped ahead some and sped up some of the remaining story creation so we can get to this end result. Here's our final story. Up until Q2 of 2020, things were looking good. We were seeing good trends upward. But then when Q2 hit, we started to see massive drop-offs. You can see a drastic drop here. If we look at the per category levels, we see some areas actually went up at the beginning of the year and then down, and others dropped off dramatically very quickly. During the first quarter, we saw big increases in machinery and food and beverage sales. But we also saw some quick drop-offs there. And then we also saw categories that dropped down dramatically, including building materials and especially motor vehicle related sales. This might be tied to a lot more work from home. We have somewhat of an understanding of what happened in the past. What's going to happen in the future? Here's the forecast produced by Tableau if we ignore Q2. Looks about like we'd expect based on the past years of generally trending up. But as soon as we throw in Q2, things are all over the place. These are probably not good forecasts to rely on, but I wanted to include them just to show what Tableau can do and to use theoretically as a talking point. Now let's look at our final results. Here's our 1-minute visualization. Pretty good for 60 seconds, but not a whole lot to look at. 10 minutes saw dramatic improvement. We got to organize it a little more and create 2 different pictures of what was going on. But the 1 hour time frame is when we really were able to create a good visualization. We were able to tell a story with the data that would lead someone to being able to make some decisions, or at least deciding where to pursue more questions. If you want to learn how to use Tableau, check out my training linked in the description. You'll notice a lot more elements of good data visualization in my 1 hour analysis, my 1 hour data visualization, than what you saw in my 1 minute analysis. The reality is, if you have a minute, the aesthetics are not critical at all. You just want to see how much you can learn in a very limited and quickly dwindling time period. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you're not already, turning on the notification bell, and sharing this video. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.